Hi everyone, this is Mojdeh from Persian Awards. Today I have a special guest, Jian Ghomeshi. Hi Jian, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for asking.
No worries. Okay, Jian, I just wanted to start with where have you born and in which city you grow up? Talk about your childhood a little bit.
I was born in London, England. I was born in a home. I was born in a house. It was a home birth in London, and but both my parents are Iranian, and they were among the first. I call them pioneers because they were among the first Iranians to leave Iran well before I was born, and they left in the early 1960s. They went to England and lived there for a few years, really outside of any kind of Persian community. They had my sister first and then me. And I grew up, my first years growing up were in England. I still kind of feel like I'm English, British. I mean, you're British by birth, but British citizen if you're born there. So that's part of my identity. But it was there that was the beginning of really growing up as an immigrant who didn't have much of an immigrant community around me. That certainly was true when I ended up coming to Canada. But even as a kid in England, of course, I didn't understand it at the time, but all of my friends were white kids who there was a sense that I was a little different from that time because they would actually call me Blackie, which is very strange because obviously I'm not black or anything close to it, but I was tanned enough compared to the kids in England that was my moniker.
So you were different. You can say that you felt that they gave you the feeling that you were different.
Correct. Yeah. I didn't know how to identify that at the time, but later on in my life, I certainly began to understand that was because my family was Middle Eastern, was Iranian, and there really wasn't anybody in West London at that point that was of our background.
So how did you handle this? You were born there, right? But you felt it was different. You were different, right? And you were living there for how long? Like for all of your childhood, right? And then you immigrated to Canada.
We came, actually, it's an interesting story because we came when I was about 8 years old to Canada. Mm-hmm. And when we first moved to Toronto, we moved to an area in the middle of Toronto called the Don Mills sort of area that actually even at that time, this would be the late 70s and through the early 80s, was a very diverse place that had a lot of new immigrants. So actually, when I first moved to Canada, it felt very emancipating because all of my friends were also first-generation immigrants. My best friend was this kid named David, who was a black kid, and there was Roy, who was a Pakistani kid, and Omar, who was German and Pakistani. And so even though they weren't Iranians, I felt like suddenly I was amongst people that were like me, that were, had parents from different parts of the world, and we were all, so that was my first experience in Canada, and it was actually a very positive one. But about a year and a half into being in Canada, my father, there used to be a show called The Jeffersons, where the family, they're a New York family, and they moved to the Upper East Side, and it's like, because they've come into some wealth or something. So my father was like, we are moving to Thornhill, and it was like, so we're moving on up, we're moving to this area. But we moved to a suburb that was extremely conservative and very white. And that was when I really started to feel like I'm different, particularly because that intersected with the revolution in Iran and then the hostage crisis. And what a lot of Iranian immigrants and Persians who come to Canada or anywhere in the world now don't know, because either they're not old enough or they weren't here, but that was a very, very difficult time for Iranians because we were just seen as the enemy. And so what that led to in me was some very difficult years where I say this with some shame now, because of course I'm proud of my Iranian ancestry now, but it led me to sort of go into the ethnic closet and not want anybody to know I was Persian, because ultimately they would call me a hostage taker or a terrorist, or and say things like that to my parents. So that was a difficult time. And that period, the 80s in Thornhill, in Canada was you wouldn't necessarily know it seeing me. I always seemed like I was a confident kid and I was doing okay, but that was a very difficult time of trying to grasp at what my identity is, and trying to somehow fit in, and feeling profoundly like I didn't fit in. My nose was too big. I have a funny name. At that point, I had an English accent, which made things even worse. I would play hockey with the other kids, and my dad would be up in the stands, not really even understanding the game. And I was just filled with all this confusion, and in some cases anger at my parents. Like, why am I so different? The great irony of all of what I'm saying, as you probably know, because I'm sure you're familiar with Toronto and the immigrant communities here now, is that very area that I grew up traumatized by being by the dearth of Persians at that time, and the fact that we were the only people for miles around who were of Iranian background. That area has become the epicenter of Iranian migration now. There's hundreds of thousands of Iranians in Thornhill now, and so I drive up there, and I have both a chuckle and kind of I sort of shake my head and say, "Thanks, guys. Where were you 30 years ago when I could have used your help?"
So you create that environment for that area, I can say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jian, when this kind of things happen, and you look like that you are a confident kid and everything is okay, was it the time that you started to listen to some kind of music and you realized that you like music? Is that the time, or is it another time?
Yeah, I was always, music was always my fuel, for sure. I became a drummer by I guess I was maybe 12, 13 years old. I started playing in a band, and then I started playing the guitar and singing. And of course, that would become my career for about 10 years after university. But it was definitely an outlet for me. And actually, even when I was in England, there's a picture of me, I guess I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I was on the BBC playing drums. So it was always somehow in me, but it was also it was also a source of trauma as well. Everything was trauma, because my role models, I mean, my great hero was an artist named David Bowie. And David Bowie, I wrote a book called 1982, and it's about a character who he's a little kid who doesn't fit in and wants to be David Bowie. And it was, of course, loosely based on me. And, Bowie was this like handsome white guy with a little button nose and a perfect. So I would aspire to be like a rock musician in the tradition of these people that I looked and sounded nothing alike. But yeah, that was my passion to this day. Remains music. It's my food. It's my fuel. It's my inspiration, and it's the celebration of what I want to be involved in discovering and celebrating in life, for bringing new artists to the fore of the public eye. In the current role of this program I've started called Roqe, any opportunity to find a Persian musician or an Iranian artist who's great, that I can play any role in giving exposure to, it's always important to me.
Great. So after that, you play drum, as you said. Are you still playing drum?
I mean, I still have my drum set, and yeah, of course I can still play, but I don't think I'm as good as but in the 1990s, when I played in this band, I was singing and drumming. We were touring over 200 nights a year. So I would say my skills were at their apex then. Now I feel like I'm, I feel like I'm a guy, you know, I feel like the way I play guitar and the way I play drums, if you're not a musician, you'd watch me and go, wow, he's really good. But if you're actually a drummer, you go, he's okay. You know, he's standard. And same with my guitar, my voice. I mean, I've always been a good writer. I wrote songs that became pretty successful, and I you know, ended up writing columns for newspapers and writing a book and all those things. So writing and even music writing was a lane that I think I'm good at. In terms of playing, I really don't think I've ever been that special.
And talk about your field in university is totally different what is about the teenager when you were a teenager. Can you explain that for us, please?
Well, I ended up doing political science and history and gender studies. And actually, I was always interested in politics. I was always interested in history and politics. So the fact that when you go into university, you get to choose your field was actually very liberating. It was like, wow, I don't have to do maths and sciences anymore. I can just do this. So I did very, very well. In fact, my grades in high school weren't as good as they were in university, because I feel like in university, I got to choose my passions. There was a lot of negotiation, you know, with my parents. As you know, with Persian parents, it's there's steps of, in my case, there was, you know, a step ladder of disappointment. You know, the moment that they realize I'm really not going to become a doctor, the moment they realize I'm not going to be an engineer, the moment they realize, I mean, can you imagine? Then I get a scholarship in political science to do graduate work, and I end up playing in a band, in a rock band, which was just I mean, it was such a profound disappointment to my parents. They're just like, what have we done? How did we? But then the band did pretty well, and the dentist, our dentist, asked for tickets to a show, and you know, we kind of started to do well, and I made some money and things like that. And so my parents were like, okay, but it wasn't really until I ended up writing for newspapers and ended up on TV and doing journalist work that I think my father could, you know, feel more comfortable saying what I do, because for years it was like, you know, he's a musician, you know, they weren't comfortable. My dad was an engineer. We come from family of businessmen and engineers, and same on my mother's side. So, you know, I was an outlier in that sense. But the fact that I did political science and history, I mean, I was also very active and activist in university, and I for some reason, you know, I've always ended up being a public person one way or another, unwittingly to a certain extent. So if you trace my history, you go, oh, in grade 6 he was the class president, in grade 8 he was the, you know, valedictorian, in the end of high school he was the president, and then in university I became the student union president. So I was always interested in that kind of involvement, and usually I would regret it about halfway through and feel self-conscious and nervous, because I've never actually been as confident as people think I am when they look at me. I'm actually quite sensitive, but I always end up taking on those roles somehow.
You mentioned this even when you were a kid. You didn't have confidence enough even when you moved to Canada. You mentioned that as well. So why did you choose to be a public figure when you didn't have the confidence? Is just because you wanted, or you didn't have any other choice?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think I just gravitated towards the kind of things that would put me in public attention. You know, being a student union leader, or being somebody who writes or performs. I've definitely always been a performer. But you know, I have to say, I mean, that paradox that you're talking about, that contradiction of being a public person but being sensitive about myself, is actually something that in my years of interviewing folks, in fact, I started writing a book about this once, and the book was called, I guess I can talk about it because I haven't finished the book, but it was called Everyone's Neurotic. And it was about how in interviewing the most successful people in the world, I would find out that each one of them would let on in one way or another, if not very directly, that they had extreme anxiety or insecurities or concerns or sensitivities. So, someone like Salman Rushdie, for example, telling me that he thought every book he'd ever written was shit until somebody told him it was okay, it's good. Or Tony Bennett saying, I get butterflies when I go on stage every time, wondering if I'm going to screw up, or that kind of thing. Great broadcasters saying they're nervous every time they're on the air, and that was instructive, and I take some solace in that, because I think there is something in a lot of performers, especially if you're an artist or a creative type, where you want to put yourself out there, but at the same time you get desperately hurt by the comment that somebody makes below your performance or something like that. So that's definitely been the case for me. I mean, at this point, I've grown through ups and downs and ups, I've grown a thicker skin to realize that, especially in the current world, it's impossible to be liked by everybody, and you're going to have detractors, and you have to kind of shout it out and try and live your life with as much integrity as possible. But I try not to be as sensitive. But I still, I'll still look at myself in the mirror and go, why is that nose so big? Why can't it be more like Brad Pitt?
I think it's the reflective of the kids that they were talking about it when you were a kid. It's not about now, right? So you talked about interviewing successful people like Salman Rushdie and other people that you mentioned. Talk about that experience. How did you come up with all of those professionalism when you were talking to them, and handle the situation when it was really hard?
Well, I've always been really interested in people. I mean, I'm interested in learning, and I'm interested in people. So those are good qualities in an interviewer. I mean, because my interest is genuine. If I sit down, I don't have the fortune of interviewing you. In this case, you're interviewing me, but I would love to interview you, and I would genuinely be interested in your story. So it comes from an honest place. And when I found, after the years in the band, when I started to work in media, first in television and then in radio, I really found like I really learned that I had found my place, because leading conversations, learning about people, trying to talk to them about their story is truly a passion for me. And I think that, and I sort of have I'm instinctually able to kind of read people and want to find a rhythm in conversation with them. So that, and just hours and hours and hours and thousands of hours of doing it helps to make a good interviewer. I think when I began, when you say, how do you handle difficult situations? I started doing interviews. I mean, I'd done a little bit in the 1990s when I was in the band. I sort of guest hosted. There was a station in Canada called Much Music that was like MTV. And at one point they were doing, it was an election time, and they were bringing in rock musicians to interview the candidates for prime minister. And I was one of those people they brought in, and I interviewed a couple of candidates and stuff. And I felt like, wow, this is really something I'm interested in. And I would appear on programs, and I would write things and think, well, that's something I probably want to do. when I started doing it in the early 2000s, though I was new and I was nervous, and I didn't handle situations where that didn't go well in as good a manner as I know I could now. In other words, I would get very nervous. Oh, the interview's not going well, and I would try and bail to the next question. I mean, there's all kinds of things that I can think of. Doing an interview with Harrison Ford that was just horrible. He was bored and not giving me answers, and I was so self-conscious that this must be about me and my questions. And today or years later, I would kind of look at him in a situation like that and go, "Do you want to be here? Why are you not answering the questions?" I would have, confront the situation, but that takes a lot of practice, and that takes confidence, and it really takes, for me, being a good interviewer is really about doing as much preparation as possible, especially if I'm doing a long form interview where I want to go to difficult places in it. If somebody's written books, I'll read all the books. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, I really do that preparation. Anyone who knows me or has worked with me does know that is true of me, that I want to be as prepared as possible so that when I'm in the conversation, I can both have the confidence myself to know that I can take the conversation wherever possible, but also to give a nod to the subject, to the person I'm interviewing, where they at some point in the interview go, "Oh, this guy's really invested. He's learned about me," and so they want to invest in the interview as well. And hopefully, when it's a good dance and both people are involved, it can turn into a really energized and illuminating conversation.
So you got the experience by practicing and being more prepared for the interview and knowing about that person that you're doing it, right?
I mean, thank you for that was a much better way, a succinct way of putting what I rambled on for about 10 minutes about. But yes, being interested in people, genuinely interested, preparing, having a sense of people, and then lots of practice. Yeah.
Okay, so please let us know about the time that you were in CBC and Q program. How was that, and how did you ended up with that program, that Q program?
I started doing TV. I did in around 2001, 2002, I got a TV show, and which was a late night arts and culture show. It was a national program. It was live TV on Thursday nights where I would interview people, and it was actually set in a bar. It was called Play. And I mean, speaking of diving into the deep end, I didn't have a lot of TV experience, let alone live on national television. So that there was a learning curve there, but it was all preparation. I did a couple of other programs that it was preparation so that by 2006, I started piloting ideas for a show I wanted to develop, which we launched, I guess, in 2007, called Q. And Q was my show. I would interview people. It was a variety program, at the heart of which was long form interviews. And, it wasn't that long ago, but it was a period before, for example, podcasts or conversations like this didn't exist, with as much, there wasn't a lot of that going on at all, I think. And so there was this moment where, not that this still isn't true on, major mainstream media and stuff, but where long form content was really shunned. There was this idea that no one's got the attention span for long interviews anymore. That's a thing of the past. Everything has to be sound bites and snappy. And before we launched Q, in fact, there were CBC executives. I mean, this is a story I've told many times, but who, took me into a room and showed me studies that said, you can't do an interview longer than 8 minutes. and you have to find a niche and do that. So what do? I launched a show that's a variety program that with long form interviews, and found out that, you know, if the content is good, and I still believe this, if it's compelling enough stuff, people are interested. I mean, the same people that the experts assumed didn't have attention span anymore, i.e. young people, younger generations, were willing and ready to sit and listen to a 45-minute interview with Jay-Z, or watch a 45-minute interview or an hour-long interview with Leonard Cohen, or whatever these things that I was doing. And that really became the bread and butter of a show that became very successful. I mean, Q grew and became the highest rated show in CBC history. I mean, and it was in CBC radio history. And that was amazing. That was a really gratifying situation, given that it wasn't expected to work, and it was kind of a strange conceit. Like I say, now it's funny because we've come back around because of the ability in media to do long form content and, you know, podcasts and things. Long form content has become popular again. I mean, people have discovered, which shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, is there anything better than a really good conversation where you're excavating ideas or information that you never heard before from someone? Theater of the mind. I still love audio. I still love radio and podcasts, probably more than I love visuals, video. But at that time, this was, you know, this seemed like a strange step that was swimming against the stream to launch something with long form content. So over the course of those years at CBC, at Q, you know, I ended up interviewing major figures from different areas of society around the world, including a lot of Iranians that are people that we really value, from Asghar Farhadi to Azad Nafisi to Master Grani to Shirin Neshatter, et cetera, et cetera. And that meant a lot too. The very first Q show, I don't know if you know this, but it was April 16, 2007. On the very first show, I started the show speaking in Farsi, in Persian. And for the first minute, of course, my version of Persian, which isn't perfect, but because there have been so much speculation of what's this new show going to be like, and who's this guy ژیان Ghomeshi, and I thought it'd be funny to just start as if it's going to be a Persian show. So, but over the course of it, I got to. I always did something special on Nowruz and tried to incorporate as much Persian content in as I could too, which was kind of a win after the childhood of feeling left out.
That's great. Is there anybody that you wanted to interview but you didn't have a chance, or they didn't accept the interview?
Yeah, actually, there is, and it's David Bowie, because I always wanted to interview him. I never had the chance, and I never expected him to die in his late 60s. Like, I still, even in recent years, I had this idea that, there's going to be some moment where, Bowie will be like 85 years old and I'll do this interview with him because he was one of my heroes, and so obviously I was gutted when he died in 2016, but also I kind of thought, my dream of getting to interview Bowie is over with. So that's the simple answer to that question. Yeah, David Bowie.
You mentioned that at the first show in Q, especially, you started speaking Farsi, but you cannot write in Farsi or read in Farsi, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you are in Roqe and you are with most of the Persian people after being with all of like English interview and everything. So what is this kind of like transition for you? What is the feeling?
Actually, it feels amazing. It's challenging doing something as a startup, as opposed to just being a person at a network, obviously. But an existing mainstream network. But honestly, there are things about this. I mean, people will say, "Oh, ژیان, I'm really enjoying your Roqe thing, but you were at CBC," and I'll say, "No, I'm really actually liking this," and they'll say, "Yeah," but they won't believe me. But what I really love about this is, first of all, I've always wondered what I could contribute somehow to the broader Persian community and to an absence, a hole that existed in my life where I didn't have access to information about our Iranian community that was in English. I mean, me and a lot of second and third generation Iranians, and a lot of kids who even first generation but are growing up here, don't consume Persian media. It's not been our thing to watch BBC Persian or Iran International now, or listen to some Persian radio or something. We consume CNN or the New York Times or the Daily Show or whatever it is, or satellite radio, and that's in English. And so I really wanted to play a role in filling that hole. What if we did something now that the Persian community is exponentially growing outside of Iran? We're in the millions in the diaspora. What about something that speaks with and to that population in English, in the lingua franca of the world, rather than in Persian? So giving back to the Persian community, that element of it has been really important to me. The fact that I have the ability to do this as a global program has been really weirdly satisfying and surprising. What I mean by global program is, because of the nature of social media, just like this program that you're doing that I'm on right now, you can reach people around the world. So 33 to 35% of the audience of Roqe, and we're close to about 2 million downloads of our program since we launched about a year and a half ago. 33% of that has been in Iran. So to know that I'm doing something, I'm speaking mostly in English, as you know. There's a couple of interviews, Bahman Gowadi or Rastok or Farid Zolan, that we did in Persian, but for the most part, it's been in English. To know that I'm doing this show and that 1/3 of the audience of those 2 million downloads so far have been in Iran is, let alone in other places in the world, is really, really, really satisfying. And I would say the third element is, and I don't know if I haven't talked a lot about this, and I don't know if you were intimating this by sort of leading me here, but this is partly, when I said I'm interested in people, I mean, this show and Roqe Media and all that I'm doing is part of my journey of discovery too. It's very selfish in a way. It's like, I really think for me, and I think for a lot of people I've learned in the Iranian diaspora, we wonder who we are. I mean, we're this strange hybrid where, of course, I'm Canadian, but I come from the Middle East. I'm British. I was born there, but my family is Iranian. My family values are Persian. Add to that the trauma and the backwash of living through a revolution and the hostage crisis and the Iran-Iraq war and all of that our collective global community has had to live through. It leads to a lot of confusion. I mean, it leads to, we kind of know to a certain extent what an Iranian in Iran is, but, who are we, the rest of us outside of the world? And what are the ties that bind us? What's the connective tissue? And so that voyage of discovery, if you don't mind me putting it that way, if it doesn't sound too too expensive. That voyage of discovery is a big part of what this is. And I'll just finish by telling you one thing that has been really, really amazing. I had this hypothesis going into creating Roqe that and in English, that there is something that connects us, those of us who are Iranian and those who are watching this who will be of Iranian background. There's something that connects us around the world that's quite profound. And the one thing that I can tell you, or one of the things that I can tell you that we've really learned by doing this program for the last year and a half now, is that no matter the age or the gender or the location or the amount of time outside of Iran, you know, Reza in Berlin and Fatima in Sydney and Arjang in San Diego and Liraz in Vancouver, whatever, you know, we feel connected. We have this umbilical cord to each other, which it's almost, and maybe that's a function of a very strong culture. Maybe that's a function of the trauma. Maybe that's a function of the family values extended to a broader global family, but it's really profound. And that has been really the most gratifying part of this. And that's what I continue to want to discover. What is that connection and what is our identity about?
Great. So now you're doing Roqe. Is there anything else that you want to tell the audience? Is there anything else that you're doing, or you want to launch it, or any kind of news that you haven't told your audience that you want to share here?
Like I'm getting married and I'm going to tell you here.
anything that you want to share?
No, I mean, I'm really these days I do my best to continue to learn, to live with as much integrity as I can, and to try and build this thing with the community, Roqe Media. Yes, there's lots of projects I'm also involved in, and I guess people will learn more about it in the near future. Some of the musical, which I'm excited about as well. No, I'm happy to talk to you about Roqe. It really is the main thing I'm doing right now, as it's a network. So we're building different kinds of programs, and we just launched, for example, an offshoot series of Roqe called The Contemporary History of Iran, and the best part of which is it gives me an excuse to read as much as I can about Iranian history and interview experts about it. So that's keeping me occupied.
So after starting Roqe, are you better in Farsi? Like you can speak better, or like is there that?
هنوز افتضاح.
Okay.
نه ببین من خیلی خوب متوجه میشم. I understand almost I can understand fully. In terms of speaking, I think I've gotten a lot better. I think my vernacular has gotten better. I used to speak Mehmoni Persian because I learned it from my parents, like, parental party Persian. So it'd be like, Salam, whatever, like this kind of weird thing that I learned from my parents. So now I'm a little bit more
casual.
I wouldn't say I'm cool yet in Persian, but I'm getting better at least sounding like a normal human being. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Jian, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? I haven't asked you, or I missed any parts that you want to share with us?
No, I thank you so much for having interest in me and what I'm doing. And I really I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the questions about growing up and as an immigrant kid, and no, I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone who is watching Persian Awards. This is Mojdeh with Jian Ghomeshi. Thank you everyone. Have a good one. Bye-bye. مژده هستم از پرژن اوارد، جوایز فارسی در ادبیات، موسیقی، هنر، سینما و بزنس. برای مشاهده ویدیوهای جوایز فارسی چنل یوتیوب ما رو سابسکرایب کنید. زنگوله کنارش رو هم بزنید تا شما اولین نفری باشید که برنامه‌های ما رو می‌بینید. ما رو در پیج اینستاگرام از این بالا فالو کنید تا همیشه جدیدترین خبرهای پرژن اوارد اولین نفر برای شما برسه.